Hello, my name is Ben Cassidy. I am the new pastor at Lafayette Trinity United Methodist Church, and it is so good to be with you all today. Well, I know that this is my first Sunday, my first sermon preaching with y'all. However, I got to admit, I've come to learn over the years that people tend to prefer to know who their pastor is before they necessarily care what their pastor has to say and has to share. So today is going to be a little bit different. And yes, we did read from the Gospel of John 21 earlier. However, there will be a bit of a sermon, but a lot of today is going to be sharing with you a little bit about my background. And I'm going to try to make it a truncated, abbreviated version. But I'm in the mood for a bit of a change of scenery, so let's go. So as I've already said, my name is Ben. And a little bit about me, my background. I grew up in Anderson, Indiana. However, I went to school at Pendleton. I feel like I had my feet in two different worlds in that I was going to this church in downtown Anderson at Anderson First UMC, while at the same time, I was attending school at the time. It was literally in the middle of a cornfield. So in a lot of ways, I feel like there's been a bit of a yo-yo, a back and forth throughout my life. So that's been interesting for me to kind of come to terms with. However, it's also given me the opportunity to get an idea and interact with a lot of different kinds of people. Now, obviously, in growing up, church was a big influence in my life. There are some people that are referred to as cradle Methodists, those who went to a Methodist church from birth growing up, and hi, that's me. However, I would be remiss if I didn't mention one of the other big factors that helped define who I am, which was camp. I remember my home church having these one weekend during the summer every single year, renting out the program center, the retreat center at Pine Creek Camp. And then I would go back to Pine Creek Camp for the week-long middle school camp experience, and I knew after that first summer that I wanted to come back and I wanted to counsel. And then just a few years later, the summer of 2002, I wound up going out there working on staff. I'm pretty sure I was the youngest one in the staff house at the time, at the ripe old wise age of 17 years old. And I would return going back out and working on staff there over the course of the next several summers. To the point where camp still has its claws in me in some ways. I keep going back and I'm helping to direct middle school camps out there each summer as well. So, Pine Creek Camp, which is just south of Pine Village, has been a huge part of my life as well. Now, in high school, there was this other element of my life that came into being, and it really didn't come until late in my high school career. I auditioned for a play my junior year of high school, and I was also had recently auditioned and was part of the show choir my junior year of high school as well. And about a week into this, originally I auditioned because, I wanted to impress a girl, go figure. But it didn't take very long, like not even a week into the rehearsal, when I realized this is something that I want to do for myself. These are some gifts, some talents that God has given me. I want to go ahead and utilize. I want to go ahead and do. I want to go ahead and practice these. And it was really awesome in that one of the other actors had us all gather to pray before each performance as well. And I began to get this idea in my head that even on the stage, in some way, shape, or form, God could be glorified, which is a pretty neat concept. I attended Hanover College, where I would study theater and theology. However, I have to admit that over those years and meeting a lot of different kinds of people, there was something about some preconceived notions I had still about theater that kind of held me back a little bit, I guess you could say. My first time I felt a call into ministry was the summer before my freshman year of high school, and I did what any sane person who feels a call into ministry does. I ran away from it. And then I got to college that first semester there, and I sat down and during some free time on a vocation retreat that was co-sponsored between the chaplain department and the theology department. Now, at the time, I was thinking, hey, it's a free night stay at the Galt House, this fancy hotel in Louisville. I was like, yeah, let's go for it. Let's do this. But it was during the free time when I sat down with another one of the students, another one of the individuals that had went, and came to this realization that, wow, I'm really being called into ministry. As this person began to open up her life to me, and I wasn't even asking questions. It was like that blue light special going off in the back of my head that they used to have at Walmart. And it was God saying, you better pay attention because you're going to be going into ministry. So during the course of my 4 years at Hanover, I was gradually, day by day, accepting more and more this call that God had placed on my life to go into ministry. And here's where those preconceived notions begin to come into play. Now, one reason why I did decide to stick with theater as my major is because I knew that if I was going to go into ministry, I'd be dealing with a lot of different people. And I needed to learn how to communicate effectively in front of crowds of individuals. And, well, needless to say, I kind of got a lot of practice doing that. I was in at least 23 different performances during college alone, which is kind of crazy when I stop and think about it. But there were some preconceived notions that I had of what the good pastor was supposed to be like. For this, that, or another reason, I thought that the good pastor wasn't supposed to have theater or be a part of theater, which I really don't know where that came from. I think maybe, if I'm honest with myself, part of it had to do with I was surrounded by people who are not typically who you would expect to show up on a Sunday morning. And me, being a young, influential Christian who's going into ministry, well, I was pulling from a lot of preconceived notions that the sphere of evangelicalism was saying about the kind of people that should be or shouldn't be in church, or could be or couldn't be in church leadership. And so I had these preconceived notions, some of which I had thrust upon myself, and some of which had been instilled in me subconsciously through society and the culture that I was growing up in. Well, seminary comes around. I went to Asbury Theological Seminary in Wilmore, Kentucky. So if you hear me say y'all or a slight southern accent comes out, well, that's just 4 years of living in Kentucky coming out. And I'm sorry. But during one of my first classes there, in Greek class, biblical Greek, I don't know why they did this icebreaker, but it was hey, say your name and say one interesting thing about me. Well, hi, I'm Ben. I was a theater major undergrad. The snake's around to the other side of the classroom, and someone gets up, hi, my name is Courtney, and hey, theater major, we have auditions for the Diviners coming up in a couple of weeks. Be there. Well, first of all, I thought that the good pastor wasn't supposed to do theater. I didn't even know there was a theater troupe there at the seminary. And then come to find out that the Diviners was actually written in the very classroom that I spent over half of my time in as a theater major in undergrad, because the Diviners was written at Hanover College. I felt like I couldn't get away from it. So that was kind of a scary thing and an interesting thing for me to consider and go through. And when I tell you I was angry, I mean, I was angry. I wasn't happy with myself at that moment, and I couldn't figure out why. Here I was fulfilling, I was doing what God was asking me to do. I was going to seminary to prepare to be the good pastor, and then I felt like there was a part of me that I was purposely ignoring, a part of me that kind of is a part of who I am. And so I made a deal with God. I threw out my fleece, if you will. Told God, tell you what, I will go to these auditions. And if you want theater to have nothing to do with my life moving forward, well, easy. I won't get a part. I went to the auditions. And I got the lead role. I found myself flexing some muscles that I had developed, that I had learned in undergrad, and that God had given me just naturally. And here I was playing this 15-year-old, I assume, with autism. That's kind of how I played it. And I found myself happy. I found myself feeling whole in a way, because I found myself utilizing these gifts and these talents that God had given me. And after opening night of the Diviners, a girl that was in class, a young lady that was in class with me, came up to me and shared with me that she had lost her mother a few years back. And the character that I was playing, Buddy, he was dealing with the grief and the loss of his own mother throughout the play. And she came up to me and let me know that a lot of these questions and how I played this character actually reflected part of her grief journey as well. And it was in that moment that I began to remember and realize, you know what? God is capable and able of showing up in a lot of different ways. God can use a lot of different tools for ministry to reach out and to touch people's lives. And that's when I began to realize that Hanover was part of me figuring out who I was. In seminary, I needed to learn how to develop who I was towards a more effective ministry. How am I going to use the tools that God had given me in ministry, in church, as a pastor moving forward? So I began to learn that there were some preconceived notions that I had either placed upon myself or were instilled upon me by the culture around me that were just wrong and actually worked against the very person that God had made me to be. And actually, in some ways, wound up hindering, or could potentially wind up hindering, the ministry that God was calling me to do moving forward. Now, this is where John 21 comes in. As part of who I am, this passage that was shared this morning about Jesus asking Peter 3 times, do you love me, do you love me, do you love me? Yes, I do, yes, I do, yes, I do. And then Jesus telling Peter, this is the kind of death you're going to be experiencing. You're not going to like it. You're going to be sacrificing a good deal. But this is the path I'm calling you to do. This is the purpose that I have for you. And it's not always going to be pretty. And here's why this is my favorite part, my favorite story in the Bible. Because I identify with it. If I'm going to be completely vulnerable with you, identify with it in almost a painful kind of way. Because Peter looked around and he saw the disciple whom Jesus loved. He saw John kind of skulking around, eavesdropping. I don't know what he was doing. But he saw John. And Peter asked, well, what about him? Now, I don't know why Peter asked this. I mean, it's just some speculation, some assumptions that we could be making here. It could be that Peter is wanting to know if John's life would wind up easier or better, and so maybe he should be more like John. Or maybe he thought, maybe John is going to wind up the same as me, and I don't want that. Or maybe misery loves company, and if John wound up the same way as I did, then maybe I'd feel better. I don't know. But for me, when I see Peter asking this question, I do see, well, what about John? Because maybe if his ministry is more successful, maybe I need to be more like him. Whatever the reason is, Jesus looks at Peter and he says, Peter, so what? So what? If I want him to remain until I come back, who cares? That's not for you to worry about. You need to worry about you. I've given you a call. I've given you a way to follow me. You need to pay attention to that instead. And so this is where I find myself identifying with Peter. And I think that we can all find ourselves identifying with Peter. Because we will look around and we will have all these preconceived notions all around us. Maybe it's about our job. You know, if I want to be the most successful teacher, I need to be like my 4th grade teacher and emulate the things that he did. If I need to be the best accountant that I can possibly be, maybe I need to change myself to be more like that other individual in the cubicle next to me. Maybe if I'm more like this other guy, maybe they'll like me. Maybe they'll give me what I need in this relationship. In all these cases, we have these preconceived notions about what life should be or how we can be more successful. And in so many of those cases, these preconceived notions, we allow them to dictate who we are and what we do moving forward. In some cases, they're mostly harmless. But in all those cases, if we allow these preconceived notions of what we think other people are expecting of us, and if we allow those to dictate our actions moving forward, well, there is harm being done because we're not living into the true, authentic people or persons that God has called us to be. Which is a really scary thing to stop and think about. I realized in my own journey, and in a lot of ways I'm still in that chapter of my life, God isn't calling you to be someone else. God made you who you are. You know, in me coming into Trinity, I'm realizing I don't need to be a Tracy Leslie. I don't need to be a Paul Anderson. I don't need to be a Reverend Emerson. I don't need to be my predecessors. I just need to be me. And trust God, and dare I say it, even trust myself enough. Trust that God made me to be who I am for such a reason as this, for such a time as this. Which leads me to you now. I know that in a lot of cases it's easy for churches to look at other churches, at mega churches, and ask themselves the question, well, should we be more like them? Should we be doing what they're doing? In essence, act like Paul. Well, what about them? And I can hear Jesus telling me, and I can even hear Jesus telling the church, don't worry about them. You do you. God made you the way you are. Quirks and all. Be willing to trust God enough and to use the gifts and talents that you have to move forward in a healthier and a better way. To move forward in the ministry that I have called you to. So needless to say, I'm excited about this next chapter that we're going to be able to have together. This next chapter of ministry that we'll be embarking upon together with one another. And so let me go ahead and end with this. We all have preconceived notions in our lives of what effective or successful ministry should look like. May we be a church. May we be a people that are willing to trust God enough with who God made us to be, to fulfill the calling that God has given us. In your own individual life, may you learn to develop the trust in God that God made you who you are for such a time as this. And so that moving forward, you can do some incredible, successful, amazing things just by living into the authentic person that God made you. God bless.